All right, hi guys. So today we're going to be working more with decimal tenths and decimal hundredths, but this time we're going to be looking at what happens when we have what happens when we have a mixed number with, uh, say we had a mixed number with fractional tenths or fractional hundredths. What would that look like as a decimal? This is really simple. It's just we're going to be looking at place values again, basically like what would be in our ones place. Or how many till we get to the next rounded whole. So if you look right here on the screen, we got fractional tenths and we got our decimal tenths. We're all pretty good at those right now. So say I was going to count by fractional tenths to reach one whole. I mean, what would I do next? 7 tenths. I go to 8 tenths. If I just kept adding tenths, eventually I get to 9 tenths, and then 10 tenths. Or this is one whole, right? 10 tenths equals one whole. Now, what if I kept going? Well, I'd have an improper fraction, right? 11 tenths. But we know how to turn improper fractions into mixed numbers, so I could also write it as 1. Oh, I'm going to have to put in a fraction here. I could put 1 and 1/10. 1 2/10. And so on. We would know how to count by tenths. But the point is, eventually, we'd get to one whole, 10 tenths, and then if we kept adding tenths, we'd have our mixed numbers. We'd have 1 1/10, 1 2/10. And it's kind of the same thing as decimals, except our one whole is going to look different. So say I was counting up tenths by decimals, I would go to at 0.1, 0.2, or 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths, 6 tenths, 7 tenths, 8 tenths, 9 tenths. And then we kind of covered this a little bit yesterday. What would be next? Well, I wouldn't write this. That's 0.10. That's not 10 tenths, is it? Look, let's go back. That's only 1 tenth because that one is in our tenths place. Or it's 10 hundredths. Like 0.1 equals 10 hundredths. We talked about that yesterday. Um, but that's not what I would do. Because then I'd just be back to where I started, and it wouldn't make sense. Then we'd never get to one whole. So we have to move over to a decimal place, just like if we were counting by ones from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Eventually 10, we'd have to move over a place value. And it's the same thing with decimals. So before the decimal, now we have 1. And then after the decimal, we have 0. Because we counted by tenths, and eventually we have 10 tenths, or 10 tenths equals one whole. And this is what one whole would look like as a decimal. And then what would happen if we kept going? 1 and 10 tenths. I mean, 1 and 1/10, excuse me. 1 and 2 tenths. 1 and 3 tenths. 1 and 4 tenths. And it would just keep going. And eventually we'd get to 1 and 9 tenths. And then what would have to come next if we kept counting? Well, it wouldn't be 1 and 10 tenths, because that's actually not 1 and 10 tenths. That's 1 in 1/10, which is already right here. So we'd have to go up to the next place value. So we look at that 9, go up to the next place value, add, now we're at 2 wholes in 0 tenths. And then it would keep going, and so on and so on. So yeah, so mixed numbers as a decimal, it's just look at, we've been working with decimals less than 1. Now we're just doing decimals greater than 1. So these are essentially mixed numbers just as decimals. But what would that look like for hundredths? Like, this is tenths, and tenths are fairly easy. What would that look like for hundredths? So right here I have 98 hundredths. What would come next if we kept counting? 99 hundredths, and then finally 100 hundredths. or one whole, right? That fraction is one whole. And then what would come after that? Well, it'd be, oh geez, that was huge. If we kept if we kept adding 100th, eventually we get to 100 and 100th, 100 and 100th, hundredths. But now we have an improper fraction here, right? Because our numerator is greater than our denominator. So another way we'd have to write this, I'm going to just take one of these so I can copy it. Another way we'd have to, I guess I didn't have to do that. The way we could say 100 and 100ths is 1 and 0 hundredths. 100 and 100, excuse me, 100 and 100ths be 1 and 1 hundredths. And then if we kept counting, eventually it would be 1 and 2 hundredths. If we kept counting, kept adding all those hundredths till we got to 1 and 99 hundredths. So imagine like we started at 1 and 100th with a mixed number, and we kept adding 100th every time till we got to 1 and 99 hundredths. What would come next if we added one more hundredth? It would just be 2. 2 and 0 hundredths, or just 2 wholes. You have 2 wholes. Oh my gosh. And so it's kind of the same thing as decimals. These are, I don't know why I put those. So it's kind of, and it would be the same thing with decimals. So say we started at 98 hundredths. What's 98 hundredths as a decimal? 0.98. So we got, it's like we learned yesterday, how many tenths could we pull out of 98 hundredths? Well, it'd be 9, or there's a 9 in the tenths place. So there's 9 tenths, and there's 8 hundredths remaining. Or there's just 98 hundredths. And what would happen if we kept counting? We'd go to 99 hundredths. And then what do you think would happen here? Would it look like, is this next? Is this 100 hundredths? No, because 100 hundredths, look at it as a fraction where I'm circling. 100 hundredths is one whole. Look, we have a 0.100. This is just 1/10. So, see, we're in the tenths place. We only have 1/10. 0 in the hundredths place. And that third place value is actually the thousandths, but we won't talk about that yet. So this isn't right. So it would make sense if we could count by 98, 99 to 100, but that's not where we go to. We have to, because we're only 100th away from one whole. Like same here in the fraction, we're 100th away to one whole. So then we just have one whole. And it doesn't matter how many zeros you write. So say I wrote 1.00, 1.0, or say I didn't put the 0. Those are all the same thing. The zeros just aren't there. But what if we kept counting by hundredths? Because then we'd have 1 and 100th, 1 and 2 hundredths, 1 and 3 hundredths, and then so on and so on. And eventually, just like up here in the fractions, we get to 1 and 99 hundredths. Our next, if we added one more hundredth, it'd just become 2 wholes. So it's fairly easy. I hope you all understand that. I thought it was easier to type these ones instead of drawing them today. There's not much we really needed to draw. But so on your Google Classroom today, you're going to see just turning written out numbers that are written out with words, and putting them into their place values in decimals. That'll be fairly simple. And then there'll be a little bit more of a matching activity, and then some counting like this, just to see if we understand just to make sure you guys understand, or so you can get some practice counting by tenths and counting by hundredths. So I hope good luck on that. I hope you all hope it's fairly simple. I think it seems pretty simple to me. And I will see you guys tomorrow.